Have you ever built the foundation of an empire, only for an arrogant kid in a slim-fit suit to kick you out because he thinks artificial intelligence replaces 10 years of actual grit? They stripped my power, tossed me a $200,000 training budget, and fired me for fraud. What they never realized was I used that exact money to legally buy the ground beneath their feet. Listen closely while I explain how I evicted them. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Violet Baker. I am 35 years old, and for the last 10 years, I bled for a company called Aerovox Dynamics. We were based in Austin, Texas, manufacturing commercial drones and autonomous heavy equipment. When I first joined the team, we were operating out of a miserable, leased garage with a leaky roof and spotty internet. By my 10th anniversary, I had personally built an intricate, bulletproof supply chain and a massive warehousing network that spanned the entire country. I wrote every single safety protocol from scratch. I secured every federal aviation and hazardous materials certification. I knew the weight of every pallet, the exact temperature requirements for our highly volatile lithium batteries, and the first name of every forklift driver on the floor. I was the architect of their physical reality, the grease in the gears that kept the company moving forward and making millions. I loved my job. I thought my loyalty meant something. Then came the modern corporate plague. His name was Bryce. He was 28 years old and the newly minted vice president of operations. How does a guy who cannot tell the difference between a pallet jack and a hydraulic press get a title like that? It is painfully simple. His uncle was the lead investor of our Series C funding round. Bryce was a walking, talking caricature of every toxic tech bro you have ever had the displeasure of meeting. He wore incredibly tight, expensive tailored suits, checked his cryptocurrency portfolio on his phone during critical safety briefings, and spoke entirely in hollow buzzwords. Every time he opened his mouth, it was a meaningless word, salad of terms like total automation, agile ecosystem, and disruptive synergy. He had never packed a cardboard box in his life, but he was utterly convinced that a few artificial intelligence algorithms could instantly replace a decade of my blood, sweat, and logistical mastery. It did not take long for Bryce to set his sights on me. To him, my department was not the backbone of the company. It was, in his own arrogant words, legacy overhead and a massive waste of floor space. He needed to make his mark, and he needed a sacrificial lamb to prove to his uncle that he was ruthlessly optimizing the payroll. The demotion was swift, brutal, and perfectly designed to humiliate me into quitting on my own. He summoned me into his sleek glass-walled office, flanked by a silent, note-taking human resources representative. Violet, we are pivoting toward a leaner, software-driven infrastructure, Bryce said, swiping on his expensive tablet without even bothering to look me in the eye. Your current operational model is obsolete. We are reassigning your 40 team members to the new automated logistics hub. You cannot run hazardous material transport with software alone. Bryce, I warned him, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. There are federal compliance laws, which is exactly why we are transitioning you to a new role, he smirked, finally looking up with a condescending grin. Congratulations, you are now the facilities compliance manager. They stripped away my 40 employees in a single afternoon. They took my budget, my security clearances, and my dignity. Then, they physically moved me. I was kicked out of my bright corner office overlooking the main production floor and relocated to a windowless, makeshift closet right next to the janitor's break room. My new workspace smelled permanently of industrial bleach and stale coffee. They gave me a desk that wobbled unevenly and a cheap plastic chair. The message was loud and clear: you are worthless, so please resign. But Bryce had a significant problem. Texas might be an at-will employment state, but I was a senior female executive in my mid-30s with a flawless 10-year track record. Firing me outright without documented cause would invite a massive wrongful termination lawsuit, and his uncle hated legal liabilities more than anything. So, Bryce devised what he thought was a genius plan to quietly push me out the door while covering his own tracks. He threw corporate hush money at the problem. 2 days after my banishment to the janitor's hallway, I received an email from Bryce detailing my new responsibilities. He was allocating a $200,000 budget to my new department. The catch: I was required to spend the next 3 months continuously attending external training seminars, procuring third-party vendor audits, and upgrading my legacy knowledge through partner certifications. If I failed to utilize the entire budget and acquire these vague certifications within 90 days, it would be officially considered a failure to meet performance goals. That would give him the airtight legal grounds to terminate me for cause. He thought he was burying me in useless bureaucratic busywork. He thought I would sit in my closet, cry over my lost title, and quietly fade away into corporate obscurity while he played with his new automated toys. I sat in my plastic chair and stared at the computer monitor. The words, "Partner Certification Training Budget," glowed brightly on the screen, followed by the approved, fully accessible balance of $200,000. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the urge to scream or throw my keyboard at the wall. Instead, staring at that absurd amount of corporate funding handed directly to a woman who knew every single structural, legal, and operational weakness of Aerovox Dynamics. A cold, slow smile spread across my face. Bryce was an absolute idiot. In his arrogant rush to build an airtight case for my eventual termination, he had just handed me a loaded gun and a massive pile of cash. He wanted me to buy partner certifications. He wanted me to spend $200,000 of company money to train and certify. He gave me the budget, the legal mandate, and 3 months of absolute zero oversight, assuming I was a washed-up dinosaur too defeated to fight back. He was dead wrong. He had just handed me the master key to dismantle his entire empire from the inside out, and I was going to pull the whole building down on his head without breaking a single law. I needed an impenetrable corporate shell. I spent the first 72 hours of my exile mapping out a structure that no forensic accountant could easily pierce. State registries are generally public records, but Wyoming is a beautiful anomaly for those who value absolute, uncompromising privacy. Unlike other jurisdictions that demand transparency of ownership, Wyoming statutes allow the creation of anonymous limited liability companies where the true beneficiaries are completely shielded behind a nominee registered agent. I hired a specialized boutique law firm based in Cheyenne, wiring them exactly $1,500. I instructed them to establish an entity named Apex Quality Assurance. However, I absolutely refused to list my own name anywhere on the incorporation documents. Instead, the ultimate beneficiary was legally designated as an irrevocable trust I had quietly established 7 years prior, on paper, in the eyes of the federal government and the public. Apex Quality Assurance was a fully independent, highly specialized third-party auditing firm with a corporate administrative address in a nondescript office park. In reality, it was just me, sitting in a windowless room measuring 10 feet by 12 feet, typing on a company-issued laptop. With the ghost entity legally established, the next phase required funneling the mandated $200,000 budget directly into my absolute control. This is where my replacement's blind obsession with technology transformed from an annoyance into a lethal weapon. He considered himself far too visionary to be burdened with mundane administrative tasks like reviewing vendor invoices, to aggressively cut operational costs. He had recently fired 3 senior accountants and implemented an automated financial software system to handle the entire accounts payable pipeline. I knew precisely how that algorithm was configured, because I had thoroughly read the vendor implementation manual, a highly sensitive document he had carelessly left completely unsecured on the shared corporate intranet drive. The software was explicitly programmed to automatically approve, process, and issue payment for any vendor invoice submitted by a department head. provided the requested amount remained strictly under the threshold of $50,000. The algorithm was optimized purely for speed, completely devoid of human skepticism or basic common sense. I began my test run cautiously. I submitted an initial invoice from Apex Quality Assurance for an extremely niche hazard mitigation seminar, pricing it at exactly $12,500. The software processed the request and issued a direct deposit in under 4 hours. No human eyes ever saw it. Confident in the exploit, I escalated the operation. I generated meticulously detailed invoices for services that sounded incredibly complex, but meant absolutely nothing in reality. $39,500 for comprehensive lithium volatility auditing protocols, $42,000 for aerodynamic stress compliance modules, $48,900 for autonomous supply chain risk assessment packages. Every single submission was instantly swallowed by the automated system and paid out without a single red flag. Within 3.5 weeks, the entire allotted training budget transitioned seamlessly from the corporate operating accounts directly into my private trust to satisfy the physical requirement of my role. I printed out hundreds of pages of publicly available federal safety regulations, placed them in cheap plastic binders, and stacked them neatly on my desk. If human resources ever checked, I was diligently completing my training. But siphoning the money was merely a distraction, a strategic move to establish a documented financial relationship. The true devastating blow was hidden inside the Master Service Agreement. As the officially designated Facilities Compliance Manager, corporate policy granted me the legal authority to execute vendor contracts on behalf of the corporation, so long as the financial scope remained within my pre-approved departmental budget. I spent 4 late nights drafting a 70-page vendor agreement between the company and Apex Quality Assurance. It was an incredibly dense, brutally boring document filled with the kind of mind-numbing legal jargon that arrogant executives routinely ignore when they are rushing to their next meeting. Buried deep within Section 4, Subsection 12, Paragraph 3, I inserted a lethal poison pill. I used standard 12-point font, perfectly blended into a section regarding secondary quality control measures. The clause explicitly stated that by accepting these specialized training modules, the corporation legally acknowledged Apex Quality Assurance as the sole, exclusive certifying authority for all active commercial product lines. Furthermore, it stipulated that absolutely 100% of manufactured units required a unique digital certificate of compliance, generated exclusively by Apex, before they could be legally cleared to leave the manufacturing floor or be transferred into the custody of any shipping carrier. By countersigning that document in my capacity as a manager, I legally surrendered the entire supply chain's permission to exist to my own anonymous Wyoming company. If Apex did not sign off, not a single piece of hardware could be sold, shipped, or moved across state lines. It was a complete operational stranglehold, legally binding, meticulously documented, and entirely invisible to the executive board who thought they had marginalized me. The logistics trap was flawlessly set, but to ensure total victory, I wanted absolute, undeniable leverage over their physical existence. I needed to own the very ground they walked on. During my decade of building the national logistics network, I had personally overseen the acquisition and development of our primary distribution hub located in Nevada. It was a massive, state-of-the-art facility spanning 400,000 square feet, serving as the beating heart of our entire fulfillment operation. Every single item we produced eventually routed through that specific building. I knew a closely guarded financial secret about that property that the new management team had completely overlooked in their rush to modernize. The corporation did not own the facility outright. It was financed through a highly leveraged commercial mortgage held by a mid-sized regional bank. Due to recent severe cash flow issues caused by reckless spending on unproven software platforms, that mortgage was teetering dangerously on the edge of technical default. The final balloon payment was scheduled to mature in exactly 45 days, and I knew for a fact they did not possess the liquid capital to refinance it under favorable market terms. When my father passed away 5 years ago, He left me a substantial inheritance wrapped in a private family trust. I had never touched a single dime of that money, letting it grow quietly in conservative index funds. It was time to put his legacy to work. Operating under the heavily protected umbrella of my trust, I contacted a ruthless corporate broker operating out of Las Vegas. I directed him to approach the regional bank holding the warehouse mortgage. Financial institutions absolutely despise holding bad commercial debt, especially when it appears the borrower might imminently default and force a lengthy foreclosure process. I offered to buy the distressed debt outright, in pure cash, at a slight premium over the remaining principal balance. The bank eagerly accepted the buyout to clear the risk off their ledgers. The legal paperwork took exactly 14 business days to clear the county clerk's office. When the final ink dried, the deed of trust was officially transferred. I was no longer just a disgraced employee sitting in a toxic closet. I was officially their primary creditor and the undisputed legal landlord of their most critical physical asset. Every single month, they were blindly paying rent directly into my accounts. Being the legal landlord granted me the unilateral right to enforce and modify the specific covenants of the commercial lease agreement. I immediately drafted a strict lease addendum regarding hazard management. Since I was the compliance manager, it was literally my documented job to receive, process, and file all property-related paperwork. Receiving the addendum from the new landlord raised absolutely zero alarms in the corporate system because I was the only person tasked with reading it. I simply stamped it approved and filed it deeply into the central database. The new regulatory clause was simple, but legally devastating. It stated that any structural modification, unauthorized repurposing of zoned storage areas, or any violation of federal fire safety codes regarding the storage of hazardous materials would constitute an immediate material breach of the lease. In commercial real estate law, a material breach bypasses standard 30-day grace periods for rectification. It triggers an immediate, non-negotiable termination of the lease contract. I knew exactly how the new automated warehouse system functioned, because I had watched the young vice president present his brilliant plan during an all-hands meeting. His advanced algorithms prioritized rapid packing efficiency over basic chemical separation protocols. It was mathematically inevitable that his software would eventually make a critical, dangerous error regarding the highly volatile components we stored. I had built the walls around them. I had written the rules that governed them. And now, I secretly owned the locks on their doors. Every single piece was perfectly positioned on the chessboard. All I had to do was sit back in my cheap plastic chair, drink my stale coffee, and wait for my arrogant replacement to confidently step directly onto the landmine he had helped me finance. The transition to total automation was a spectacular slow-motion train wreck, and I had a front-row seat. Bryce rolled out his highly anticipated algorithmic warehouse management system on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the artificial intelligence had completely redefined the concept of workplace hazards, because the software was explicitly coded to minimize forklift travel time and maximize packing speed. It completely ignored the rigid chemical separation protocols I had spent years drilling into the floor staff. The system calculated that the most efficient placement for our highly combustible, industrial-grade lithium-ion drone batteries was aisle 4. Aisle 4 happened to be directly adjacent to the bulk storage racks holding hundreds of gallons of highly corrosive, industrial floor bleach and heavy machinery cleaning solvents, one accidental forklift collision, one minor electrical spark, and the entire Nevada distribution hub would be transformed into a massive toxic crater. It was terrifyingly stupid, but mathematically efficient. The entire supply chain was plunged into unpredictable, daily chaos. Pallets of delicate microchips were routed to the heavy machinery loading docks, while massive steel chassis frames were sent to the fragile packing stations. Whenever a particularly glaring error caused a bottleneck, Bryce would burst into my cramped, bleach-scented closet, clutching a stack of digital risk transfer waivers. In his mind, pushing the liability of these algorithmic hiccups onto the facility's compliance manager was a brilliant leadership move. "Violet, I need your signature on these updated floor plans," Bryce would say. leaning against the doorframe, trying to look imposing in his tailored suit. The algorithm is currently running at 94% efficiency, but Human Resources wants the compliance department to formally sign off on the new storage configurations. He expected me to fight him. He wanted me to argue about fire safety codes so he could document my resistance to innovation. Instead, I gave him my most cheerful, dead-eyed corporate smile. "Absolutely, Bryce. Whatever you need to keep the innovation flowing," I replied smoothly. I would take his tablet and proudly stamp the digital approval using the official credentials of Apex Quality Assurance. I approved every single disastrous layout. I validated every idiotic algorithmic routing decision. Bryce would walk away with a smug grin, completely convinced he had broken my spirit. He thought he had successfully domesticated the difficult legacy employee. He had no idea he was just asking the executioner to double-check the sharpness of the blade. While Bryce was busy playing visionary, I was quietly orchestrating the largest data heist in the company's history, and doing it completely out in the open, under the heavily documented guise of executing my mandated third-party compliance training. I initiated a massive, automated file transfer. I submitted formal paperwork arguing that for our external vendor to properly audit our aerodynamic safety standards, they needed unrestricted access to our technical archives. Over the course of 3 days, I systematically copied the proprietary blueprints for every single drone model, along with all active flight permits issued by the Federal Aviation Administration. I moved the entire payload onto the heavily encrypted, private servers owned by Apex Quality Assurance. I now held their physical inventory hostage through the certification clause. I owned the concrete floor their inventory sat on. And I had successfully legally secured their most valuable intellectual property under the banner of vendor security. Down on the warehouse floor, the panic was becoming palpable. My old team members, the ones who had survived the ruthless layoffs and were now completely at the mercy of Bryce's software, started sending me desperate text messages. My phone would buzz constantly throughout the day. "Violet, the system just ordered 40 pallets of rotors, but 0 chassis screws. What do we do?" Read one message from a senior floor manager. "The AI keeps routing the hazmat trucks to the standard loading dock. Please tell me you can override this." Read another. I read every single message, but I never intervened. I simply replied to each frantic text with a single, smiling emoji. I would follow up the smiley face with a piece of friendly, casual advice. "Hey, things seem a bit unpredictable down there. Might be a good idea to start packing up your desk. Take your favorite coffee mug home this weekend, just in case." They thought I was being cynical. They did not realize I was giving them the only warning they were going to get. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during a mandatory company-wide town hall meeting held in the main cafeteria. Bryce strutted onto the stage holding a microphone, basking in the glow of a massive projector screen. He proudly announced the official launch of our newest, most advanced flagship drone model. It was a massive contractual obligation, a make-or-break moment for the entire fiscal year. Thanks to our newly streamlined, automated fulfillment network, we are officially scheduled to ship out 50,000 units of the new flagship series next Friday, Bryce announced loudly to the sparse crowd. This simultaneous nationwide rollout will absolutely shatter our quarterly projections and drive our stock price to a historic high. The few remaining executives in the front row clapped enthusiastically. I sat in the very back row, sipping a lukewarm bottle of water, watching the giant countdown clock Bryce had projected onto the wall. 50,000 units. Next Friday. He was promising the board of directors a massive, triumphant victory. He was betting his entire career, his uncle's investment, and the company's public reputation on a Friday shipping deadline. I looked at my phone. I verified that the automated safety protocols on the Apex servers were armed and ready. I checked the Nevada lease agreement sitting comfortably in my private trust's legal portfolio. I smiled in the dimly lit cafeteria. The countdown had officially begun, and Friday was going to be an absolute bloodbath. The illusion of corporate normalcy shattered exactly 48 hours before Bryce's grand shipping deadline. It was Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in my bleach-scented closet, reviewing the final confirmation protocols for the Nevada property. When the door swung open without a knock, two large men in black security uniforms filled the narrow doorframe. Behind them stood a pale, nervous woman from Human Resources. They did not say a single word. They simply gestured with their hands for me to follow them. They escorted me down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor, past the open-plan marketing desks, and straight into the executive suite. The destination was the main glass-walled conference room, a transparent box designed to make corporate executions as publicly humiliating as possible. Bryce was already pacing at the head of the long mahogany table. Sitting off to the side was the newly hired chief accountant, looking absolutely terrified and clutching a thick stack of printed financial ledgers. I walked in and took a seat without being asked. Folding my hands neatly on the table, the two security guards immediately positioned themselves on the inside of the closed door, crossing their massive arms. Bryce stopped pacing. His face was flushed with a volatile mixture of triumph and furious indignation. He thought he had finally found his silver bullet. "Did you honestly think you were smart enough to pull this off?" Bryce hissed, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. He stepped forward and violently slammed a thick stack of printed invoices onto the polished wood directly in front of me. I recognized them instantly. They were the meticulously documented billing statements from Apex Quality Assurance. The new accountant had apparently decided to manually reconcile the automated accounts payable ledger for the quarter and noticed a massive, rapid hemorrhage of cash flowing to a single, previously unknown Wyoming vendor. $200,000. Bryce practically spat the words at me, leaning over the table to invade my personal space. "You siphoned $200,000 of company funds into phantom training courses and ghost certifications. You are a thief. Violet, you orchestrated a massive embezzlement scheme to line your own pockets because you were bitter about your demotion. We have the paper trail right here." The Human Resources representative shifted uncomfortably in her chair, holding a pen tightly over a pristine legal pad. The chief accountant refused to make eye contact with me. Bryce was breathing heavily, his chest puffed out, reveling in the absolute power he thought he held over my life. He expected me to break down. He expected me to beg for mercy, to cry, or to furiously deny the allegations. I looked at the scattered invoices, then looked up directly into his eyes. My expression did not shift a single millimeter. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the terrifying, absolute calm of a surgeon holding a scalpel. I signed every single one of those vendor requests. "Bryce," I stated clearly, letting the words hang in the silent room. "As the facilities compliance manager, I was explicitly directed by you, in writing, to utilize that exact budget for third-party auditing and safety training. Apex Quality Assurance provided the mandatory risk assessments for your new automated warehouse layout." "Do not lie to me," Bryce shouted, slamming his hand flat against the table. "There was no training. We did not receive any services. You just routed the money out the back door." "If the services were truly phantom, Bryce, then why did your highly optimized, artificial intelligence financial algorithm approve every single invoice?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "More importantly, look at the bottom right corner of every single page you just threw at me. Read the digital authorization stamp." Bryce glanced down. The color drained from his face for a fraction of a second before his rage masked it again. Right there, in bold black ink, was his own electronic signature, generated by the automated software he had personally implemented and championed. "You exploited a software glitch," he sneered, desperately trying to regain the upper hand. "That does not absolve you of fraud. I am terminating your employment, effective immediately, for gross financial misconduct and blatant embezzlement. You are entirely stripped of your equity, and you are receiving absolutely zero severance pay. Frankly, you should be thanking me that I am not having these guards escort you directly into the back of a police cruiser. My authorization limits were strictly followed, and your system authorized the payout," I replied evenly. "Your contract is shredded. Violet," Bryce snapped, aggressively pointing his finger toward the door. "You are done. You do not go back to your desk. You do not touch another company computer. You do not say goodbye to anyone. Security is going to march you out of the lobby right now, and if you ever set foot on this property again, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." I did not argue. I simply stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I gave the terrified accountant a polite nod, ignored the human resources representative completely, and turned toward the door. The two towering security guards immediately flanked me, their hands hovering inches from my arms, ready to use force if I resisted. I walked out of the glass room and down the main hallway. The entire office had gone dead silent. Dozens of faces peeked over their cubicles, watching the veteran supply chain expert being thrown out like a common criminal. I kept my head high, my posture perfect, and my pace deliberate. We reached the expansive front lobby, stepping onto the polished marble floors. The exit was a set of large, heavy glass revolving doors leading out into the blazing Texas sun. Just as I reached the doors, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Bryce could not resist the urge to witness my final humiliation. He had followed us down to the lobby, standing a few feet away with a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. He had finally won. He had slain the dragon and secured his kingdom. I stopped. The security guards tensed, but I did not make a sudden movement. I simply turned around slowly to face the young, arrogant vice president one last time. I let a cold, genuine smile break across my face, a smile that clearly unsettled him. "You just fired the only person keeping this ceiling from collapsing on your head," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "Remember to check the company inbox on Friday morning." Friday morning arrived exactly as I had calculated. The Nevada sun rose over a staging lot, packed shoulder to shoulder with massive freight trucks. Drivers from every major national shipping carrier sat in their cabs, drinking terrible gas station coffee, waiting for the giant corrugated steel loading dock doors to roll up. Inside the 400,000 square foot distribution facility, the atmosphere was vastly different. It was an absolute graveyard. The miles of automated conveyor belts, usually humming with deafening kinetic energy by 6 o'clock in the morning, were completely motionless. The digital control panels at every packing station were locked behind flashing red screens displaying a single word: unauthorized. Down in Austin, Bryce swaggered into the corporate headquarters at 8 o'clock sharp. He was wearing a brand new, custom-tailored navy suit, ready to take his victory lap and pop champagne with his uncle. He confidently walked into his executive suite, opened his expensive laptop, and was immediately hit by a wall of catastrophic digital alarms. His inbox was completely gridlocked with urgent, high-priority transmissions. The most critical email was a direct, legally binding cease and desist order from the Federal Aviation Administration. The federal agency had issued an immediate freeze on the entire Nevada facility. Every single one of the 50,000 flagship drones sitting on the warehouse floor was officially grounded. The notification clearly stated that the corporate safety and compliance certifications had automatically expired at exactly 1 second past midnight. The sole authorizing agency, Apex Quality Assurance, had filed a formal revocation of all manufacturing, handling, and shipping clearances, citing severe, undocumented internal safety risks. Without that digital signature, moving a single cardboard box across state lines constituted a severe federal crime. Bryce panicked. The arrogant tech visionary suddenly realized his entire algorithmic empire was paralyzed by a single piece of digital paper. He screamed for his legal team, his voice cracking down the hallway. He ordered his terrified assistant to immediately locate the contact information for Apex Quality Assurance, demanding she authorize a blank check to buy back their compliance at any cost. Desperate to find a loophole, he frantically opened the attached legal revocation document. He scrolled rapidly to the very last page to find a contact name. His blood ran instantly cold, draining all the color from his face. There, sitting proudly underneath the heavy black corporate seal of the Wyoming entity, was the authorized signature block of the chief executive officer. It read, in perfectly legible font, Violet Baker. In that agonizing fraction of a second, the crushing reality hit him. The ghost company he had paid $200,000 to, The vendor he had eagerly legally bound his entire supply chain to was me. But the absolute devastation of his Friday morning was only half complete. While Bryce was hyperventilating in Texas, his beloved artificial intelligence system finally delivered its grand masterpiece in Nevada. A robotic transport cart, blindly following the most mathematically efficient coordinate path dictated by the software, attempted to squeeze a heavy, unstable pallet of industrial lithium batteries past the chemical storage racks. The automated clearance was entirely miscalculated. The robotic cart violently scraped against a reinforced steel upright, crushing the corner of the heavy battery housing. A sharp, brilliant spark arched across the damaged casing, followed instantly by a loud electrical pop. A thick plume of acrid, toxic black smoke billowed toward the high ceiling. There was no massive explosion. The building's advanced fire suppression sensors detected the highly dangerous lithium smoke within seconds, instantly flooding the specific aisle with chemical retardant foam. Nobody was injured, and the physical product loss was negligible. However, the physical damage was completely irrelevant to my plan. The automatic activation of the suppression system instantly triggered a mandatory alert to the regional federal fire marshal, officially documenting a severe hazardous material proximity failure. My structural lease trap, hidden deeply in the landlord covenants, was officially sprung. I was sitting comfortably on my back patio in Austin, wearing soft sweatpants, watching the morning birds, and taking a slow sip of freshly brewed pour-over coffee. My phone buzzed aggressively against the glass table. The caller identification displayed the personal cell phone number of the chief executive officer, Bryce's uncle, the man who had financed my humiliation. I let it ring 4 times before answering. I casually tapped the speakerphone button and set the device back down. "Violet," the older man barked. His voice was trembling violently, a pathetic, wavering mixture of raw panic and forced corporate authority. "What the hell do you think you are doing? I have my entire legal team drafting a massive lawsuit right this second. You are going to federal prison for corporate sabotage. You need to release those drones immediately, or I will destroy you." I took another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The morning air felt beautifully crisp and clean. "Good morning, Richard," I replied smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Since I was unceremoniously terminated and am no longer an employee of your corporation, this phone call is officially classified as an external crisis management consultation. My emergency advisory rate is $10,000 per minute, strictly billed in advance. By continuing to speak on this recorded line, you legally agree to these financial terms. You are currently 45 seconds into your first minute. How can I help you optimize your supply chain today?" There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Richard's ragged, uneven breathing over the speakerphone. He was a man who had spent his entire life bullying people into submission with his checkbook, and he had just violently crashed into a concrete wall he could not buy his way through. "You are extorting us, Violet," Richard finally hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "This is a criminal shakedown. I will have federal agents kicking your front door off its hinges before lunch." "Extortion requires an illegal threat." "Richard," I replied, tracing the smooth ceramic rim of my coffee mug, "I am simply an independent vendor offering to sell a highly valuable piece of intellectual property back to your corporation. You voluntarily signed a legally binding master service agreement granting my firm exclusive certification rights over your entire product line. Your brilliant nephew personally authorized the digital signature. My lawyers have reviewed it. It is perfectly airtight. If you do not wish to purchase the rights back, that is entirely your prerogative. But let us look at the mathematics of your reality." I took a breath, letting the cold, hard facts settle over him. "Your primary vendor contracts mandate nationwide delivery by the close of business today," I continued. "When 50,000 flagship units fail to leave that loading dock, your massive penalty clauses will automatically trigger. Your corporate stock will plummet to a fraction of a penny by Monday morning. The board of directors will hold you personally liable for the catastrophic lack of oversight, and they will publicly strip you of your title. You will lose everything. The choice is entirely yours." Another heavy silence stretched across the line. The arrogance was completely gone. Only desperation remained. "How much do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking with defeat. $8 million, I stated clearly. Pure liquid cash, wired directly into the Apex Quality Assurance corporate account within exactly 2 hours. Once the funds officially clear the bank, I will digitally unlock the servers and permanently sign over the master certification rights. If the money is not there in 120 minutes, the price doubles. If you miss the deadline again, I delete the digital keys entirely. "We do not have $8 million in operating capital right now," Richard screamed. "Bryce drained our liquid reserves paying for that disastrous automated warehouse software." "Then I highly suggest you drain your emergency contingency fund," I said smoothly. "You have 1 hour and 58 minutes remaining. Good luck, Richard." I ended the call. Down in the Austin executive suite, a brutal scene was unfolding. Bryce was sitting at his desk, shaking uncontrollably, his custom-tailored suit completely drenched in cold sweat. His uncle stood over him, veins bulging in his neck, screaming obscenities. Richard practically grabbed Bryce by the back of his neck, forcing his face toward the computer monitor. "Log into the contingency reserve," Richard commanded, his voice trembling with homicidal rage. "You arrogant, stupid child. You thought you were a genius because you fired a veteran executive to save a few dollars. Now you are going to wire her $8 million to buy back the company you just handed to her. Sign the authorization. Bryce, do it right now, or I swear I will let the board sue you into personal bankruptcy." Bryce's hands shook violently as he typed in his administrative credentials. He was crying, the young, untouchable vice president of operations. The man who had banished me to a broom closet was sobbing as he manually executed the largest financial hemorrhage in the history of Aerovox Dynamics. Sitting on my patio, I watched my tablet screen. Exactly 84 minutes later, a green notification banner flashed across the display. The international wire transfer had successfully cleared. $8 million rested securely in my private trust account. I smiled, tapped a few keys, and disabled the digital blockade on the Apex servers. Bryce had flown into Las Vegas on the private corporate jet late Thursday night. He had wanted to be standing triumphantly on the Nevada warehouse floor when the 50,000 units rolled out, fully intending to take photos for his social media profiles. He was physically there, standing near the loading bays, when his tablet pinged with the server release notification. He let out a massive, gasping sigh of relief, dropping to his knees on the concrete floor. He thought he had survived. He thought the nightmare was over, that he could just load the trucks, ship the drones, and somehow salvage his fractured career. He stood up, wiping his face, and shouted at the floor managers to start the conveyor belts. The massive rolling doors began to inch upward, letting the desert sunlight spill onto the warehouse floor. Then, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the morning dust. 4 heavily armored tactical vehicles belonging to the Nevada County Sheriff's Department aggressively pulled into the loading zone, blocking the massive freight trucks from moving an inch. A dozen uniformed deputies stepped out, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Leading them was the regional federal fire marshal, holding a thick clipboard. Bryce ran out to meet them, waving his hands frantically. "Officers, there is no emergency here. The fire suppression system handled the minor spark hours ago. We are cleared to resume operations." The lead sheriff did not even blink. He pulled a thick, legally sealed document from his vest and shoved it hard against Bryce's chest. "We are not here for the fire, son," the sheriff said, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "We are here to enforce an emergency judicial order, due to the severe hazardous materials violation your automated system caused this morning. You are in immediate, uncorrectable material breach of your commercial lease agreement. The grace period has been legally waived by a judge due to the imminent threat to public safety. Your lease is officially terminated." Bryce stared at the document, his mind completely incapable of processing the words. "Terminated? What are you talking about? We rent this facility. You cannot just kick us out." Read the signature on the landlord's petition, the sheriff instructed coldly. Bryce looked down. His eyes widened in absolute, soul-crushing horror. The registered legal landlord, the entity demanding the immediate eviction, was the private family trust of Violet Baker. "You have exactly 4 hours to completely vacate this premises," the sheriff announced loudly, turning to address the entire warehouse staff. "You must remove all personnel, all proprietary machinery, and all manufactured inventory at exactly 1 o'clock this afternoon. My deputies will place heavy padlocks on every exterior door. Anything left inside this building after that deadline legally becomes the permanent property of the landlord. Start walking, folks." Bryce collapsed backward against a concrete pillar. It was physically impossible. You could not move 400,000 square feet of heavy industrial machinery and 50,000 packaged drones in 4 hours. It would take weeks. They had just paid $8 million for the legal right to ship their product, only to realize I was permanently locking their entire inventory inside my own building. They were completely, utterly annihilated. I was not sitting in Austin anymore. I had taken a very quiet, late-night commercial flight to Las Vegas. I was currently sitting inside the cabin of a brand-new, midnight black European sports car, parked on a dusty elevated ridge directly overlooking the Nevada distribution hub. I rolled the tinted window down, letting the warm desert wind blow through my hair. I turned the premium sound system on, letting the smooth, triumphant rhythm of a classic jazz trumpet fill the air. Through my designer sunglasses, I watched the beautiful chaos unfolding below. I watched the deputies stringing bright yellow police tape across the main loading bays. I watched the freight truck slowly turning around and driving away empty, and right in the center of it all, I watched Bryce. He was on his knees in the dirt parking lot, tearing at his own hair, screaming silently into the unfeeling Nevada sky as the officers began forcefully ushering his employees off the property. I reached into the passenger seat and lifted a crystal flute filled with incredibly expensive, ice-cold champagne. I raised the glass toward the warehouse in a silent, mocking toast to the young visionary. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip, feeling the cold bubbles pop against my tongue. I picked up my phone, permanently blocked the corporate headquarters phone numbers, and turned the device completely off. I shifted the car into drive, the powerful engine purring beneath me, and steered toward the long, open highway leading into the sunset. They said I committed training fraud. I just figured the lesson I taught them was worth every single penny. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.